In the last month, leading Argentine presidential candidate Javier Milei and his running mate Victoria Villarruel have each made statements defending the nation's bloody dictatorship of the 70s. And protests have followed.
Es un acto de provocación hacia toda la sociedad argentina. Los actos de genocidio y de lesa humanidad, de los crímenes de lesa humanidad, los comete el Estado.
Milei and Villarruel have long held that what Argentina experienced during the 70s, rather than the court-declared state terrorism, was a civil war with travesties on both sides.
Hubo una guerra. Los terroristas de Montoneros también cometieron delitos de lesa humanidad.
Earlier this year, a Congress member who was running as a small party presidential candidate railed against the repeated denialism of Milei and Villarruel, connecting their proposed economic policies to those implemented during the US-supported dictatorship.
¿Por qué reivindican el negacionismo? Porque están dispuestos a hacerlo de nuevo.
Why do they deny this history? Because they're willing to do it again.
Son las políticas de Martínez de Oz.
Because their economic policies are the same. Policies that can only be applied through lots of repression. Milei's proposals, which include deep social cuts and vast privatization, are starting to gain some powerful supporters among Wall Street.
Such drastic surgery is needed to get this beleaguered country on the road to sound free market prosperity.
Though the US government still largely views the anarcho-capitalist with hesitance. In many sectors of the Argentine voting base, however, even the suggestion of such policies, amidst a worsening economic crisis, are already drawing protest.
Yo creo que en el ADN de este pueblo está la resistencia. Incluso aquellos que eventualmente votarán por estas propuestas, cuando la realidad llegue a sus cuerpos, a sus trabajos, a sus familias, de algún lugar de nuestro ADN va a surgir esa respuesta popular.
Milei has already promised to crack down on such dissent if he takes office, echoing to some degree what Bregman says about crushing economic plans only being implemented through repression. But historically, the only method that has managed to halt Argentine protest has been terror, a strategy once encouraged by the US and Argentina as it sought effective partners for its geopolitical and economic goals. I'm Amelia Reyno, an independent journalist from the US, living in Buenos Aires since late 2021. This is a story about how 7 decades of US economic interference contributed to Argentina's crisis of today. And this is Chapter 4. In 1976, after the Argentine junta took control in a civic military coup supported by the US, they began 2 campaigns: economic shock policy, aimed at rapidly undoing decades of workers' progress and redirecting profits to traditional Argentine elites and Wall Street, and a crusade of terror, the only feasible way to push through a plan sure to crush living standards for the majority. The Argentine military, in an ideological crusade intended to stifle all dissent, replaced the nation's courts with friendly justices and kidnapped tens of thousands of citizens, holding and torturing them in more than 800 clandestine outposts across the country. Many were forcibly disappeared, often thrown alive from planes into the Rio Plata. Declassified documents show the US was not only fully informed about the extent of the repression as it bankrolled the junta, but top officials encouraged it. Meeting with Junta Admiral Guzzetti in October 1976, then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger urged the military to speed up the process before news of the human rights abuses made official US support impossible. "We would like you to succeed," Kissinger told him. "The quicker you succeed, the better." In fact, in South America's southern cone, the dual campaigns of economic shock policy accompanied by terror among US infiltrated military governments were quickly becoming a formula by design. This interconnected structure, called Operation Condor, was born in 1975 after Augusto Pinochet had taken power in Chile via a CIA-orchestrated coup, joining US-backed dictators in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. The underground network of dictatorships working in unison, was, according to author J. Patrice McSherry, a secret component of a larger U.S.-led counterinsurgency strategy to preempt or reverse social movements demanding political or socio-economic change. After the junta took control in Argentina, it became an official Condor member, accepting the terror assignment more enthusiastically than any other. Over its 7-year rule, the dictatorship disappeared more than 30,000 Argentines, including many of the organized labor leaders who led protests against the previous attempts at drastic economic reform. Some of the corporations who actively participated in plotting the coup also got intimately involved in the efforts to disappear their own workers. U.S.-owned Ford Argentina not only donated to the dictatorship its official kidnapping vehicles, but it also collaborated with the military to install a clandestine torture and death camp in its own working facility. Shortly after the coup, former Ford Union delegate Carlos Propato, along with other organized workers, was kidnapped by the military with the company's assistance. Propato was tortured in Ford's perversely converted lunch area for 12 hours before being transferred to other facilities where the military secretly held and tortured him for 2 more years. I lost all my teeth. They broke my spine. I lost half of one of my eyes. We were prisoners for power. We did not commit any crime, ever. We only claimed the rights that belonged to us by the Constitution. But as more and more workers and activists were kidnapped, mobilizations ground to a halt.
El verdadero objetivo de las dictaduras militares fue terminar con el ascenso.
The objective of the military dictatorship was to put an end to the rise of the workers.
A partir de eso se pudieron implementar estas medidas económicas.
If you could discipline the working class, from there, the economic measures could finally be implemented. Those new measures effectively stopped industrial growth, froze wages, and opened the country to privatization. Changes that late Argentine journalist Rodolfo Walsh suggested were an even greater atrocity than the terror for their capacity to push millions into planned misery. As Walsh wrote in his 1977 open letter to the dictatorship, within a year, real wages decreased by 40% while private profits increased by almost the same margin, and unemployment more than doubled as factories closed. A day after circulating his letter, Walsh was disappeared too. U.S. investors and key political figures, however, were exhilarated by the shift authored by the Argentine economic minister, a board member of 2 U.S.-led international corporations.
Esa es la clave de por qué Estados Unidos llega a la región de una manera tan abrupta.
That's the key to why the U.S. arrives in the region in such an abrupt and systematic way.
Tanto por el lado del terror de las metodologías.
It's not so much about the terror,
Del cambio de paradigma económico que significa todo esto.
but the economic shift that it
El
brings.
neoliberalismo triunfa.
For neoliberalism to triumph, you need an unemployed army. You need there to be no combative trade unionism. The U.S.'s fundamental interest here is for Argentina to leave the welfare state and turn to the wild market. Soon, as international condemnation about apparent human rights abuses in Argentina grew, sparked by the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo movement of mothers silently marching with signs of their lost children, this attachment would become less comfortable for the United States. And when President Jimmy Carter took office in 1977, the U.S.'s political message towards Argentina quickly changed, though private U.S. bank loans and CIA involvement continued unabated. But great damage had already been done. A reign of terror had descended on Argentina. After years of workers' organization, a disciplined population would accept the new economic regime. Conditions were set for more upheaval to come. In Chapter 5, After the Dictatorship, how the US dollar seized control of the Argentine economy, paving the way for the crisis of today.